All right, let's jump right into this deep dive on Crybaby by SZA. I'm so excited to unpack this one with you, especially that first verse, so raw.
Oh yeah. SCA really knows how to capture all those like complicated, messy feelings we all have, but don't always talk about.
Exactly. And she does it with this like unique blend of vulnerability and defiance, which is I think what makes this song so compelling. We wrote a really insightful analysis actually to guide us today, focusing on the verses and the chorus of Crybaby.
Mhm.
It really digs deep into like the message behind the music.
Sounds great. I'm ready.
Okay, so that opening line. Maybe if that attitude took a backseat, Miss Know-It-All, you'd find a man. It's so blunt, but it immediately pulls you into SCA's world, right?
Yeah, it does. And I think what's fascinating, she's not just talking about like one specific relationship,
Yeah.
It's like she's tapping into this broader societal expectation, especially for women, that being assertive or opinionated is like a bad thing.
That's a really interesting point. Like she's challenging that whole idea that women need to like shrink themselves to be desirable, which I love. Instead of like blaming her partner, she's turning the lens inward and acknowledging her own role in the dynamic.
Right. And there's a lot of self-awareness in that. The next line, you got no chill, you can't, damn baby, reinforces that whole struggle with self-control, managing those like really intense emotions.
That's like she's both calling herself out and offering herself some compassion at the same time.
Yeah, definitely. Then she goes even deeper. Maybe it's my fault, always blaming the world for my faults.
Ooh, that line.
Such a good word.
That line really gets to the heart of it, doesn't it? This tendency we all have to like externalize blame to avoid taking responsibility for our actions.
It's a classic defense mechanism.
Totally.
Hmm.
But SCA is not letting herself off the hook.
Not at all.
It makes you wonder, though, what kind of pressure made her too soft, you know? She seems to acknowledge that external factors have shaped her, but she's not using it as an excuse.
Right. It's more like she's trying to understand the root of her patterns,
Yeah.
like why she reacts the way she does. Where does that sensitivity come from? And that leads us to the pre-chorus, which is where the song takes a really interesting turn.
Yes, because all I seem to do is get in my way. And blame you, it's just a cycle, rinse, recycle. That image of rinse, recycle is so powerful. It captures that feeling of being stuck in a repetitive cycle.
Yeah, of self-sabotage.
Exactly.
Absolutely. And, if we look at this through the lens of attachment theory, it makes even more sense. Our early childhood experiences, they can like create these really ingrained patterns in our relationships. And we might unconsciously seek out partners who reinforce those patterns, even if they're unhealthy.
Wow, that's so insightful. So it's
Yeah.
not just about individual blame, but also recognizing these larger forces that are at play.
Exactly. And then that line, you're so sick, I'm so sick of me too, shows that both people in this relationship are caught in that cycle and they're both suffering.
Okay, before we move on to that chorus,
Yeah.
I'm curious what are your thoughts on the line?
Yeah.
Maybe the pressure just made me too soft.
That's a good one. That line to me speaks to the idea of resilience. We often think of resilience as this like unyielding strength, but I think true resilience also involves allowing yourself to be vulnerable, to like feel the full weight of your experiences.
I love that perspective. It's like SCA is reclaiming softness as a form of strength, as a way of navigating the world with an open heart.
Yeah.
And that brings us to the chorus where she really owns that crybaby label.
Yes. I think we should pause here and let that sink in for a second before we dive into that really powerful moment.
Agreed. We'll pick up right there in part 2.
Okay, so let's dive into that chorus where SCA really flips the script on that whole crybaby label.
Yeah, this is where the song like takes off for me. Call me Miss Crybaby. It's not my fault. It's not my fault. If it's Murphy's Law, what can go wrong will go wrong. That defiance, that ownership of her emotions, it's so empowering.
It is. She's taking a term that's so often used to diminish and invalidate, especially women's experiences.
Yeah.
So she's turning it into this like declaration of self-acceptance.
Yeah. It makes me think about how society tries to like police our emotions,
Yeah.
telling us to toughen up or be more rational. But SCA is like rejecting that whole narrative.
Exactly. And there's a fascinating psychological layer here too. By invoking Murphy's Law, she's acknowledging that tendency towards negative thinking, this belief that things are always going to go wrong.
That's interesting. It could be like a way of protecting herself from disappointment, almost like a preemptive shield.
Yeah.
If you expect the worst, you can't be let down.
Right. But it can also become this like self-fulfilling prophecy, If you believe that things will inevitably go wrong, you might unconsciously sabotage yourself or miss opportunities to create positive change.
I see what you mean. It's a delicate balance between acknowledging those negative thoughts and not letting them control your actions. Then we get that repetition, don't I know, damn it, don't I know, oh, you know it.
Yeah.
It feels like she's both aware of the problem and frustrated by it.
Absolutely. It speaks to the human condition, doesn't it? We can have all the self-awareness in the world, but actually changing our ingrained patterns is so much harder. It's like SCA is grappling with that tension between knowing better and still feeling stuck.
So how do we break free from those cycles? Is it even possible?
I think it starts with recognizing those patterns like SCA is doing here in this song.
Yeah.
And then it's about challenging the underlying beliefs that are driving those patterns. Why do we feel the need to blame others? What are we so afraid of if we take full responsibility for our lives?
That's a lot of like deep inner work. It's not easy, but it sounds essential.
It is. And it's a process, not a quick fix, but I think SCA's music, with its honesty and vulnerability, can be a powerful catalyst for that kind of self-reflection.
Okay, let's move into that second verse where things get
Mm.
even more personal. SCA sings, maybe you should really stop smoking them backwoods so you can age backwards, please, girl.
Mm.
What do you make of that line? Is it just about smoking or is there like a deeper meaning there?
I think it's about more than just smoking. You know, it's about those self-destructive habits we all have, those things we do even though we know they're not good for us.
That's a great point. It's like
Mhm.
she's speaking to a part of herself that's engaging in behaviors that are ultimately harmful. And it connects to that broader theme of self-sabotage that we were talking about.
Right, and then she follows that with, you should stop focusing all of that negative, blocking the positive, which speaks to the power of our mindset. Our thoughts really do shape our reality, and if we're constantly dwelling on the negative, it can be hard to see the good.
Then we get that gut-wrenching line about blind spots.
Yeah.
Trying to find, you're my blind spot. It's fine. Niggas ruin me every single time. It's like she keeps falling for the same type of person, someone who ultimately hurts her.
This line really resonated with me. It speaks to the power of our subconscious patterns. We might consciously desire healthy relationships, but if we haven't addressed our underlying wounds or insecurities, we can end up repeating the same unhealthy dynamics over and over again.
Yeah, it's almost like we're drawn to what's familiar, even if it's painful.
It is. But the first step, like we've been saying, is awareness.
Yeah.
SEA's willingness to shine a light on these patterns, to explore them with such honesty, is so valuable. It gives us permission to do the same.
That's such a powerful takeaway. SCA's vulnerability becomes a source of strength, not just for her, but for anyone listening who might be struggling with similar patterns.
Exactly. It normalizes those struggles and reminds us that we're not alone in our messiness.
Okay, before we wrap up part two, I want to circle back to the chorus and that moment where SCA reclaims that crybaby label. What are your thoughts on how she uses that term? Is it purely defiant or is there something more nuanced there?
That's a great question. I think it's both defiant and vulnerable at the same time. She's not shying away from her emotions, but she's also acknowledging the pain that comes with them. It's like she's saying, yes, I cry, but that doesn't make me weak. It makes me human.
I love that interpretation. It's about embracing the full spectrum of human emotion, the good, the bad, and the messy.
Exactly. And it's a reminder that our sensitivity, our capacity for deep feeling can be a source of strength and connection, not something to be ashamed of.
So how can we apply this to our own lives? How can we embrace our inner crybaby in a way that empowers us rather than holds us back?
That's a great question to ponder as we move into the final part of our deep dive. I think SEA offers some powerful clues in the rest of the song, so let's explore those next.
Okay, so we've really like gone deep into those verses and the chorus of Crybaby, unpacking a lot there. SCA's honesty about self-sabotage, those societal expectations, and of course the power of like owning your emotions. What I'm thinking about now is what can we like learn from this?
Yeah, that's the question, isn't it? I think one of the biggest takeaways for me is that self-awareness piece. SCA, she doesn't shy away from her flaws, her tendencies to blame other people or get stuck in those like negative patterns. She puts it all out there, and in doing so, I think she kind of invites us to do the same.
Yeah, it's like she's giving us permission to be messy, to like acknowledge those parts of ourselves that we try to hide.
Exactly. And that's where real growth can begin. If we can't even admit to ourselves that we have these patterns, how can we ever change them?
Right. It's like shining a light on those like dark corners,
Yeah.
the parts we're afraid to look at.
Yeah, and that can be so uncomfortable. But it's also like incredibly liberating.
Mm-hmm.
Because once we see those patterns clearly, we can start to make different choices. We can choose to like interrupt that cycle of self-sabotage, to challenge those negative beliefs that are holding us back.
It's like SCA saying, hey, I struggle with this too. It's part of being human,
Yeah.
but we don't have to be defined by it.
Right. And that message of hope is so important. It's not about beating ourselves up for our mistakes or our flaws. It's about like recognizing them with compassion and then choosing to move forward in a different way.
So what are some like practical steps we can take To embrace our inner crybaby in a healthy way, what does that look like?
I think it starts with being really honest with ourselves about our emotions. Like, what triggers those crybaby tendencies? What are the underlying fears or insecurities that are kind of driving those reactions?
Hmm. Maybe journaling could help with that, like
Mm.
just getting those thoughts and feelings out on paper.
Absolutely. And then it's about challenging those negative thought patterns. When you find yourself kind of spiraling into self-blame or negativity, ask yourself, is this thought really serving me? Is it even true? What's another way to look at this situation?
That's great advice. It's like retraining our brains to focus on the positive,
Yeah.
to see possibilities instead of just problems.
Exactly. And remember, it's a process. There will be setbacks. There will be days when you feel like you're back to square one. But the key is to keep practicing, to keep showing up for yourself with compassion and a willingness to learn and grow.
That's such an important reminder. Change isn't linear. It's messy and imperfect, just like life.
Exactly. And it's okay. In fact, it's in those messy moments, those moments when we stumble and fall, that we often learn the most valuable lessons.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Crybaby, I want to leave our listeners with this. Embrace your sensitivity. Own your emotions. Don't let anyone tell you that being a crybaby is a weakness. It's a part of who you are, and it can be a source of strength.
Beautifully said. And remember, you're not alone on this journey. We all have our crybaby moments. It's what makes us human.
Thanks for joining us on this emotional roller coaster. We hope this deep dive gave you some new insights into SZA's music and, more importantly, into yourself. Until next time, keep exploring, keep feeling, and keep embracing the messy, beautiful complexity of being human.